Chairman, Secretary Yellen, first of all, thank you for being willing to brief me at my office on the CFIUS review process and where things are. I appreciate that very much. Director Young, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. The Government Accountability Office reported that as of January 31st, 2023, there was $90 billion in the American Rescue Plan funding remaining that is unobligated. That's a huge sum of money. Unfortunately, we haven't received timely updates about available balances from this recent legislation. Can you confirm that number?
Sir, I'm sorry to hear you have not. We have sent up to Congress. I'll make sure this committee has the balances. I have it here. We'll put it in the record and make sure your office has it. I would say for COVID funding writ large, the bills in total, 98% is obligated. Of ARP specifically, 95%
But is
is obligated.
Is 90 billion the amount? 'Cause
I'll make sure that is the amount, but it sounds in the range.
Okay.
I want to be exact with you and
No, I
provide that
appreciate that.
information.
But the fact, would you agree that we're no longer in an emergency?
So if I can, I'll let you know where the majority of those funds are. And you're
well,
right,
no,
the
I'm
public
just-
health emergency is the administration, the president is
Yeah.
lifting that order May 11th.
So we no longer have a need for a rescue plan. Would you agree with that? I mean, the emergency is over. I mean, that's what those funds were intended for, right?
Mr. Moolenaar, I just want to make sure you know where the majority of funds remain unobligated. And of course, it is Congress's discretion if they want to go pull those funds back. The majority of those funds remain in pensions, which, as you know, it has a long outlay and it remains in veterans benefits. And there's some money in HHS that, after not receiving more money, we plan on using for next generation vaccines.
So what you're saying is you've already figured out how you want to spend it next time, rather than saying, we have an opportunity to pay down the debt. I mean, $90 billion would go a long ways to paying down some debt.
No, I said it is Congress's decision. I'm, as you know, very attuned to the Appropriations Committee's constitutional role here. But I'm saying, as you make those decisions, know that most of the money remains from pensions.
But
which,
unobligated based on an emergency that's no longer there, right?
well, pension funding in ARP was always intended to spend out over a longer period of time. So you would be taking funding back that a lot of pensioners would depend on. Veterans care.
Well, let me ask you this.
Sure.
Through the appropriations process, you're the expert, couldn't we fund those pensions as part of the appropriations process like we normally do, rather than using emergency funding that's no longer for an emergency?
I will say typically multi-employer and pensions is not done by this committee, but I'm sure you all will weigh in. Look, we will provide the data and we will have a robust back and forth to see what makes sense here. I'm just simply pointing out that the majority of the money that remains was always intended to have a tail. And the question on resources for HHS is, do we want next generation vaccines for COVID?
Well, and I approve of the idea of going through the appropriations process. I'm on the Labor H subcommittee, and we can certainly look at that. But why would we tell the American people we need to spend $6 trillion of emergency funding in this last Congress, and then find out we're no longer in an emergency and we still are going to spend that money? That, to me, seems like fraud itself.
Well, Mr. Moolenaar, I'll be just very candid. We asked Congress multiple times for additional funding for next generation vaccines and therapeutics. A lot of, as you know, immunocompromised people, current therapeutics do not work. We were told no by Congress. So what we are doing now is looking at the unobligated balances at HHS and going to focus on those things. Now, what won't happen are things like long-term research in long COVID, which we don't know a lot about. So we will have to relook at our priorities here.
Well, I trust you're very capable in this process, and that when you come and talk to our Appropriations Committee, you're someone who has tremendous credibility.
They told me no.
Well, you know, I think it's a matter of let's figure out what the top priorities are. There's a lot that we spend that wouldn't be maybe as top a priority, and you might have to agree to cut back on some of that. But I just think taking the people's money that was based on an emergency when there's no longer an emergency and spending $90 billion seems irresponsible to me. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well,
Director Young, it was